that walks into a school with a gun, that's the bad guy. The good guy is the person that gets in line and waits months to get a permit to carry a weapon in our state. The good person on the amendment is the person that tries to decide whether or not the individual they're giving a weapon to is going to use it in the wrong way. That good person weighs the law. A good person obeys the law. There's been a lot of talk about gun violence, a lot of talk about bad guys and good guys. Let's get back to what this bill actually does. This bill doesn't change who can possess a firearm in our state. The bill doesn't change where you can take a gun in our state. All this bill does is says that the good guy doesn't have to get in line and ask for permission to get a permission slip from the state to have a weapon. As I was trying to ask questions earlier, my point was this. Times better just to get out and say it, I guess. Police can't stop somebody under the suspicion that you may or may not have a concealed carry permit. They can't go out there and say, you don't have a permit, therefore I can stop you. They can stop you if they have the right suspicion that says you can't legally possess a gun. If you've had involuntary hospitalization, if you've committed these felonies, if you've done the things that current law says you can't possess a firearm, they can stop you for those reasons, and they can arrest you if you actually have a gun. It gets back to the point of what is the purpose of the permit. And yes, we've talked about this since I've been in the legislature. We talked about this issue for some time, but I think the pandemic especially exposed the issue with the permitting process, delays we had in our probate court, folks waiting, getting in line, trying to have the right paperwork so they can have the permission slip to have a gun in our state. And I think now is the time to eliminate that process. Getting back to the amendment itself, if you look at the amendment, I want to go back to what I was asking the senator from the 42nd about, these exceptions. So how are you to decide whether or not you under this amendment have to go and get a federal dealer to do a federal background check for you? How are you to decide whether or not you should have to do that when you give a gun to someone else, when you transfer a weapon to somebody else? Well, grandparents are mentioned in line 43 of the amendment. So grandmother wants to give her grandchild a gun. She wants to pass down, such as in my family, her husband's gun to his grandson. The burden is on her. She doesn't have to go and ask permission in advance from the state. The police aren't coming out to oversee this process. She, the good guy, has to decide whether or not the law applies to her. You look at the amendment, it says, if the transferor, grandma, has no reason to believe the transferee, grandson, will use or intends to use the firearm in a crime or is prohibited from receiving or possessing firearms in the state or federal law. We see a similar standard on line 56 and on line 64 of the amendment. It goes down to, there's a transferor, the person given the gun, the good guy, wanting to follow the law, have reason to believe the person they're giving it to may be the bad guy. This exposes the issue with the current permitting process in itself. The good guys will follow the law. The good guys will go through the process and try to make sure all their T's are crossed, their I's are dotted. The good guy has their rights infringed upon, while the bad guy doesn't care what the law is because the bad guy is not following the law to start with. Earlier there was reference to voting, and someone asked a question comparing the Second Amendment to the amendments that deal with voting. I think there is a comparison. I'll close with this quote from Theodore Roosevelt. A vote is like a rifle. Its usefulness depends upon the character of the user. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 37th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I'm a firm believer and a strict constructionist in the Constitution of the United States and the guarantees to the people of the United States in the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. I would be willing to bet you today that 99% of the people in Ukraine would give anything that they have to have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 54th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brothers and sisters, colleagues, I know many of you know my story and my background and where I came from, but raised under a father who was a World War II baby who could tell me the stories about living here in Atlanta in 1941 and 42 and how scary the blackout drills were. Because all they had at home, like most homes back in that time, was a radio. And if they had not heard the radio, then they'd not known the news if it was a drill or if Atlanta was under attack during World War II, and how terrifying it was. And from that, and the understanding of those who are going off to war, and the value of freedom that every soldier has to put their life on the line for. And a soldier in the infantry battalion of which I served in the 1st 504th Infantry 82nd, we know the value of freedom. I also know that I stood beside my brothers of every race, every creed, every national origin. I even served next to, and people don't even really realize this, but I served next to a gentleman from Nicaragua, and this was in the 80s, when we were at odds with Nicaragua. And he was not even an American citizen, but there he was serving in the 1st 504th Infantry of the 82nd Airborne Division. Because of one thing, the foundational principles of freedom that is so much discussed at the birth of this nation. I spent a lifetime pursuing and establishing those rights, or helping others to establish themselves in the foundational principles of freedom. In essence, as a juvenile probation officer for 30 years, that's in essence what I was doing with kids, was teaching them the value and understanding of personal responsibility. I said it 1,000,000 times throughout my 30-year careers. Let your childhood want to go and reach forward and grab hold of your adulthood need to, because you're transitioning between two worlds, from the world of want to the world of hope. And the difference in those two is your want will leave you bitter, angry, and mad, but it's only your hope that compels you forward. The same as when I was a soldier in the 1st 504th Infantry, is my want that said, no, I think I'll stay right here in this foxhole, as my sergeant was saying to charge forward. It was only my hope that got me out of that foxhole and charged forward. Those principles of freedom that I spent a lifetime establishing and teaching young men and women about as a juvenile probation officer, those are for all men. The same all men that I stood shoulder to shoulder with in the infantry battalion. As I said, of every race, every creed, every national origin, we stood together as brothers in a defense of something much larger than ourselves. The Second Amendment is such a fundamental, foundational principle of freedom. And this really breaks down in my view of this. It's really just between a rural and urban consideration. People in urban areas of our state take for granted that I can call the police and within 5 minutes they're here and answering the call. But those of us in rural Georgia realize that that's not always the case. And I tell you, when I was a young man with my children were little, one such time that happened to me, we always would go camping, and I love to take my family and show them places that they've never seen. We go to all places, and I will tell you, Georgia has the best state parks in the country. We visited all the state parks from all regions of the state. But one time we would also go primitive camping, where you had no power, no electricity, no running water. You just camped primitive in a tent. And one such time was off the Yellow River in East Georgia. And my wife and I are setting up the camp, and I just so happened to be wearing shorts and hiking boots and a shirt that covered my waistline. And just at dusk, right at dark, as we're trying to get the tent up before it turns dark, these 4 gentlemen come, I say gentlemen respectively, come walking out of the woods into our camping area. And I realized real quick from my background and training that they were terribly high on something. And they were literally asking a lot of questions and acting very suspicious. And so it's just me, my wife, and our 2 kids out in the middle of no man's land. And the fact that I could just inadvertently pull my shirt up to reach back to my back pocket to let them see that I had my pistol on my belt. Their tone changed. And I look back at that moment in time thinking, what if I had been a 20-something-year-old who could not afford $80 for a carry permit? And I was out there with my family, but I couldn't afford the cost to protect my own family. And being a law-abiding citizen, I wouldn't have carried because I couldn't afford to get the permit. What would have been the outcome that day? What would have been the outcome that day? Would those 4 men come back into my camp in the middle of the night, knowing all they had to do was take me out, and they would have free reign with my family? Freedom is a responsibility. I'm a second signer on this bill because I believe in the fundamental rights, and the Second Amendment is such a fundamental right of our freedom, the right to self-defense. And if we do not have the right to self-defense, then none of our other rights ever matter. Mr. President, I will yield the well and I ask for everybody's favorable consent of this.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 5th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, come over here to mention, with due respect, a couple of my colleagues mentioned Ukraine. I'm not sure how many of you got a call, text message, or email about Ukraine. I did. The text message, phone calls, and email. There are people right now in Georgia, their families in Ukraine. They reach out to me because, as you know, I represent one of the diverse states in a district in Georgia. So and I told them, I'm praying for you. I don't know what I can do, but I'm going to forward it to the federal elected official, to our U.S. Senator, so they can probably help you. And that's exactly what I did. The reason they asked me, can you go and speak? I said, let me think about it. I didn't know what to say. But anyway, I even read on AGC that one lady mentioned they had a rally in Atlanta. They say, nobody's helping us. But that's not true. I want to explain it to the women that interviewed AGC. No, we are there to help you. United States is going to help the people of Ukraine, and we stand with you. And one more thing. A lot of folks, some folks, they said that, before you push a button or whoever, we do respect that, think about the Ukrainian. You know what? When I see it in television, all the tanks, all the armor, everything coming in, I don't think the simple gun is going to stop that. Simple gun will not going to stop what is going on in Ukraine. And I just want to mention that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Does any of the senator wish to speak for or against the measure? The chair recognizes the senator from the 31st to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, everybody, for the debate. So I do want to say, and I don't want to repeat unnecessarily what's already been rebutted, but firing bullets into the sky are only done by bad guys. I saw that at a young age in Doraville, and gang members thought it was cute and clever to shoot bullets celebrating New Year's and everything else, and those bullets coming into houses and homes where people live. So where I come from, that those are bad guys. I know there's a lot of talk about CDC studies, this and that, so I'm going to share one CDC study with you all. And as we all know, raw data, absent a proper statistical analysis taken into account, can always be misleading. In 2013, the US CDC, in conjunction with the Institute of Medicine, the National Research Council, studied this issue. The purpose of the research was to develop a proposed public health research agenda to improve the knowledge of the causes of gun violence, the interventions that prevent gun violence, and strategies to minimize the public health burden of gun violence. That research was published in a paper entitled Priorities for a Public Health Research Agenda to Reduce the Threat of Firearm-Related Violence. In their paper, they plainly stated, quote, "The National Research Council found no persuasive evidence of available studies that patches the right to carry laws decrease or even increase violent crime." So if you're out there and you're saying that the CDC has said this and that, I'd like to see what your facts are. Secondly, talk about other states just briefly. I'm going to use Illinois. Illinois seems to be a state people sometimes forget because we're down here in the South. But studies have shown, and this is data from the state of Illinois, studies have shown that individuals who wish to legally carry a firearm are less likely to use the gun to commit the crime. For example, from 2014 to 2018, the state of Illinois had an average over 176,000 active permits. Over that same period, no one was convicted of committing a crime with their permitted concealed handgun. At that time, 5 individuals faced charges, with 4 of them claiming to have used their guns in self-defense. Thirdly, I know there's a lot of discussion around the 5,000 licenses, and I thank the senator from the 17th for his comments, but just to be clear, Georgia is a shall-issue state. All persons who are prohibited must be issued a carry license if requested. And this bill only allows law-abiding citizens who have qualified for a license to carry without the burden of applying and paying for a license. Fourth, this debate is all it is, whether you can want to disagree or not. It is about law-abiding citizens versus the criminals. And I've not heard a single mention or merit to this bill discussed from the other side. All I've heard is about voting, abortion, all kinds of other issues, but not one single merit of policy that refutes what this bill is doing. And finally, we like to throw around the word extremists. And, in some places, yes, it's appropriate and it's warranted. But if you're going to tell young moms and families in the suburbs of Atlanta or the city of Atlanta or in West Georgia or in Valdosta or in Augusta or Savannah and areas in between that they're extremists because they want to protect their families in this day and age, maybe you need to rethink your priorities of what we're doing for Georgia families in this capital. Mr. President, I ask that the Senate vote red on the amendment, and I ask for favorable consideration of Senate Bill 319. Thank you.
All right, we're first going to take up Amendment Number 1, the adoption of Amendment Number 1. Is there objection to adoption of Amendment Number 1? Yes. There is objection. All those in favor of adoption of Amendment Number 1, vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the adoption of the amendment, the yeas are 22, the nays are 34, and the amendment has failed. We now take up the underlying measure. Is there objection to agreeing the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none and the main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 34, the nays are 22. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Mr. Secretary, can you please read a message from the House?
Mr. President, the following message was received from the House through Mr. Riley, the clerk thereof. Mr. President, the House insists on its position in substituting the following bill of the Senate, Senate Bill 120, by Senators Tibbins of the 37th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 18 of Title 15 of the OCGA relating to Solicitors General of State Courts so as to provide for the honorary office of Solicitor General and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Senate Rule 7-1.10B, I give notice that at the appropriate time, I intend to move that the Senate consider House action on Senate Bill 120.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption?
Senate Bill 120, a bill by Senators Tippins of the 37th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 18 of Title 15 of the OCGA relating to Solicitors General of State Courts so as to provide for the honorary office of Solicitor General Emeritus, to provide for qualifications, to provide for certificate, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
The Majority Leader has given notice that he intends to move on the Senate consideration on House action on SB 120. The appropriate time is the next legislative day. Chair continues to recognize the Majority Leader for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, 1 March 2022.
Mr. Secretary, do you have any announcements?
The Rules Committee will meet upon adjournment today in 4:50. The Finance Committee will meet in 4:50 at 1 p.m. today. The Science and Technology Committee will meet in 3:10 of the CLOB at 1 p.m. today. The Judiciary Committee will meet in 3:07 of the CLOB at 2 p.m. today. The Education and Youth Committee will meet in 3:07 of the CLOB at 3 p.m. today. All other committee meetings have been canceled. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Does any senator wish to make an announcement? The chair sees none. The Majority Leader has moved that the Senate stand adjourned until Tuesday, March 1st, 2022 at 10 a.m. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes actually have it today. The Senate stands adjourned.